Hey guys, tonight we begin with the kind of story that never made it into school books, but it lingers in county court records, faded gravestones, and the rooms no one wants to sleep in twice. It's the story of 5 sisters, all brides, all beautiful, all bound to one surname, and a trail of husbands who never made it to their first anniversary. Before we begin, take a second to like the video and subscribe, but only if you really enjoy what I do here. Let me know in the comments where you're tuning in from and what time it is. It's always fascinating to see who else is lying awake tonight with a mind hungry for strange, sleepy stories. Now dim the lights. Maybe light a candle, and let's drift slowly into this one, because once you enter the Wesson house, it's very hard to leave unchanged. They were known as the Wesson girls. Clara, Lillian, Margaret, Eleanor, and Ruth. 5 sisters raised in a house that seemed too quiet for a family of 7. It sat on the outskirts of Bell Hollow, Pennsylvania, a town with no claim to fame beyond a factory that closed before it ever opened. The Wesson house was large but sagging, white but always slightly damp, as if it held its breath in the rain. People said the windows never steamed, no matter how cold it got. The curtains never moved. The porch light stayed lit, even though it hadn't worked since 1839. Asterisk. Their father, Milton Wesson, was the county's last volunteer coroner. He wasn't a doctor, but he knew how to hold a pen steady, and in towns like Bell Hollow, that was qualification enough. Their mother, Constance, was a pale woman with wind-chapped lips and a voice like dry paper. She baked bread no one ever ate, and she had a habit of reading from her Bible aloud at night, even when she thought no one was listening. Asterisk. The Wesson sisters walked like they'd been trained to do so in unison. Long dresses even in the summer. High collars even at the creek. They rarely smiled, but when they did, it never reached their eyes. Most men in town said they were beautiful in the way paintings are beautiful, distant, silent, and untouchable. Asterisk. Clara, the eldest, was the first to marry. Her husband, Thomas Dorr, was a teacher from 2 towns over who had fallen in love with her after one silent dance at the county fair. Their wedding was held in the backyard under a lopsided oak tree. No music, no guests from the groom's side. Clara wore a veil thick enough to blot out her expression. The kiss was brief. No one remembered who clapped first. Asterisk. 12 days later, Thomas was found dead in the creek behind the Wesson house. His boots were still on, but his coat was missing. His face was pale, eyes open, lips parted like he had just said something no one could hear, 'cause of death, accidental drowning. There was no inquest. Clara wore her wedding dress to the funeral and never took it off again. She just cut the sleeves shorter for summer. Asterisk. Then came Lillian. 2 years younger and quieter. Still, she married a visiting preacher named Emery Tate, who had once preached about the dangers of female vanity. Their wedding was even smaller, just the sisters, the preacher, and their mother. The ceremony took under 5 minutes. Emery said he liked a woman who didn't talk much. 6 weeks later, he was found in the orchard with the back of his skull caved in. The tree above him had no broken branches. 'Cause of death, blunt force trauma from fallen debris. There hadn't been wind in days. Asterisk. By the time Margaret's wedding was announced, people had started whispering. The Wesson house was cursed, they said, or haunted, or hiding something. But Margaret married anyway a young doctor named Isaiah Kell, who claimed he didn't believe in curses. He died 3 months into the marriage after drinking a sleep tonic of his own prescription. His body was cold before the morning light. Margaret never left the house again, not even for his burial. She just stood by the upstairs window, one hand pressed to the glass, watching nothing. Asterisk. Eleanor, next in line, tried to escape the pattern. She didn't marry in Bell Hollow. She went all the way to Lancaster and found herself a widower named Alton Rye, who was known for his shy smile and fine handwriting. They eloped. She came back wearing a ring. He followed a week later with 2 trunks and a limp. He vanished 2 months after that, left for the store, never came back. No note, just his boots beside the front door and his pipe still warm on. The WINDOWSILL asterisk. No one asked questions anymore. The townsfolk just lowered their eyes when a Wesson passed by. The preacher mumbled shorter sermons. The mailman left letters without knocking. The town seamstress refused to alter white dresses. Asterisk. Only Ruth remained, the youngest by nearly a decade. She was different, they said. She spoke. She read books. She laughed sometimes. But when she came of age and announced she was marrying a bookseller who passed through town twice a year, no one was surprised. She left with him on a Tuesday, wearing her mother's veil and carrying a bouquet of dry wildflowers. 3 months later, she came back alone, no ring, no luggage. Just a bruise on her wrist and silence in her throat. Asterisk. She never spoke of what happened. Just went back to the house, took her place at the dinner table, and started praying aloud at night, like her mother used to. By then, Constance had long been buried. Milton Wesson followed shortly after. Some say he left behind a journal filled with confessions. Others say he died clutching a photograph of his daughters, each one with their face scratched out. But Ruth's asterisk. Over the next decade, the house fell apart in slow, careful increments. The paint peeled like old wallpaper. The porch steps softened under rain. The orchard grew wild, untamed, its trees curling like knotted fingers, but the light in the hallway stayed on. The curtains never moved. And at night, some said they heard singing 5 voices in harmony, no words, just sound. Asterisk. In 1891, a census taker knocked on the Wesson door. Ruth answered. She was alone. He asked her name. She replied, "There's only one Wesson now." He wrote it down. Under occupation, she paused, then whispered, "Widow," 5 times over. When he looked confused, she only smiled. "Not me, them." Asterisk. That was the last official record of Ruth Wesson. When the house was finally condemned. In 1902, the inspectors found no furniture, no dishes, no beds. Just 5 cedar chests stacked in the parlor. Each one held a wedding veil, a death certificate, and a single item of the groom's clothing, neatly folded, untouched by time. Asterisk. On the ceiling above them, carved in faint block letters, were 5 words. "We were good brides, once." The orchard was the first part of the Wesson property to die, but it didn't do so quietly. Asterisk. Years after the last sister's wedding and the last husband's burial, the trees began to rot from the inside out. No one could explain it. The soil was fertile. The weather hadn't changed. Yet the apples came in black, spotted and sour, the trunks split open with sap that looked too much like blood in certain light. Local boys dared each other to run between the rows after sunset, but most came back pale, breathless, claiming they'd heard a whisper at their ear, a woman's voice saying simply, "Go back." Asterisk. What unsettled people most wasn't the orchard's decay, it was that the land itself seemed to remember. Every year on the same date, June 17th, the wind would still the branches. The air would turn oddly warm, and 5 petals from 5 different trees would fall in unison. Once, a schoolteacher collected those petals, pressed them into a book, and took it home. 3 days later, her husband choked to death on a chicken bone. She moved to Ohio and never spoke the Wesson name again. Asterisk. The house sat empty, but not untouched. Passersby claimed they saw lights in the upper windows. A single lamp, always lit in the hallway, flickered between dusk and dawn. Even in the dead of winter, when the house should have been uninhabitable, someone or something kept the snow from building on the steps. No one had been inside since the county declared it abandoned. But rumors say a letter was once slid under the front door, and it disappeared by morning. Asterisk. It was Sheriff Lyle Beckett who first tried to break the silence. In 1905, after years of complaints and folklore, he assembled a team to enter the Wesson house, hoping to finally close the book on what he called the curse no one asked for. He brought 2 deputies, a notary, and a carpenter to force the door. The moment they stepped inside, the wind outside died completely. The air was thick with dust, but it didn't smell musty, it smelled sweet, like dried apples and old perfume. The floorboards creaked under their boots, but the house itself was solid. Too solid, as if it had been waiting. They found the 5 cedar chests still stacked in the parlor, untouched by time or moisture. The notary opened one Clara's. Inside, her veil was folded with surgical precision, her husband's monogrammed handkerchief placed beside it. A thin slip of paper rested atop it all. It read, "You didn't look hard enough." The next chest, Lillian's, contained a prayer book, a broken ring, and an unopened bottle of laudanum, still half full. Another note. This one, it wasn't. The branch. By the time they reached the 3rd chest, Sheriff Beckett ordered everyone out. His hands were shaking. The carpenter refused to continue. Only one deputy remained, a young man named Amos Keller, who would later report that he felt watched the entire time. Amos went back once, alone, 2 weeks later. He didn't speak. For a year after, the county sealed the property. They declared it unfit for demolition due to unresolved legal history. That was the phrasing in the records. But everyone knew the truth. They were too afraid to tear it down. Then came the girl. In 1911, a child named Elsie Monroe wandered off during a church picnic near the property. She was missing for 3 hours. When they found her, she was sitting on the Wesson porch, humming a song no one recognized. Her dress was spotless. Her shoes were dry. And in her lap was a small porcelain cup white, with a ring of violets dot. When asked where she got it, she said, "The quiet lady gave it to me. She told me to leave before dark." They burned the cup. But the smell of violets never left the sheriff's office. In 1922, a traveling historian named Elliot Greaves arrived in Bell Hollow. He was researching unsolved deaths in Appalachian towns and heard whispers about the Wesson house from a barkeep in West Virginia. He was skeptical at first, but the deeper he looked, the stranger it became. He uncovered all 5 marriage licenses. Each bore the same officiant's signature, even though that minister had died in 1857, before the last 2 weddings. The death certificates were all written in the same handwriting. And most disturbingly, he discovered that the marriage witnesses were always the same 2 names, Constance Wesson and W. Believed to be the sister's father, even long after his recorded death. Elliot documented everything. He wrote letters to historical societies, filed requests to exhume the orchard. None were granted. But he did receive one anonymous note in reply, slipped under his hotel room door. "Don't make them brides again." He left the next morning. His final journal entry read, "They weren't cursed. They were cornered." And no one listened until it was too late. Back in Bell Hollow, time moved forward, but the Wesson house remained. In the 1940s, it became a favorite haunt for local boys, until one of them, a teenager named Henry Voss, entered the parlor alone and returned minutes later with a deep gash across his palm. He said he touched the chests. Something didn't want to be opened, he said. It pushed back. By the 1960s, the orchard was almost gone. Disease took most of the trees. A storm took the roof. The hallway lamp finally went dark. But no one dared tear the structure down. In 1983, a preservation group tried to raise funds to restore the house for tourism. They pulled out after their lead organizer, a woman from Boston, was found dead in her hotel room the night after visiting the site, 'cause of death, heart failure. She was 32. Her name was Ruth. No relation. As far as anyone could prove, asterisk, and yet, the legend never truly left. People still pass down the story. 5 sisters, 5 weddings, 5 husbands buried without answers. A family name stitched to silence. Some say the sisters were murderers. Others believe they were victims of something older and colder than law. But in Bell Hollow, everyone agrees on one thing: don't say their name near running water. Don't carry a white veil through the orchard. And if you see a light in the second-story window, keep walking, because the house may be rotten, but the memories aren't. They're still waiting. By the time the 21st century crept quietly into Bell Hollow, most of the town's old buildings had been converted into antique shops or forgotten entirely. The factory never reopened. The church hadn't hosted a sermon since the Nixon administration. And the Wesson house, what was left of it, had sunk halfway into the earth, devoured by weeds and warped time. Asterisk, but people still left flowers. No. One said why. They never stayed to be seen doing it, but come every June, wild roses and paper lily would appear on the front step, arranged in odd groups of 5. Sometimes it was lace scraps or a single glove. One year, a stranger from out of state left a bride's comb and a note that read, "She never said yes." None of them did. Locals stopped asking questions after that. Asterisk. It was a graduate student, Carmen Lee, who finally decided to write her thesis on the Wesson case. She wasn't from Bell Hollow. She wasn't superstitious. She wanted a regional deep dive into unprosecuted mid-9th century female-led fatalities. That's how she described it in her abstract. But what she found wasn't just silence, it was intentional silence. A thread, invisible but taut, running through every town record, every second-hand account, every crumbling death noticed. Asterisk first, she noticed the patterns. 5 weddings, no remarriages, all deaths within the first year. But then she spotted what others had missed. All 5 husbands had previously filed land transfers or property deeds the week of their weddings, each one transferring partial control of their assets to Constance Wesson. Not their wives. Their mother-in-law. Asterisk. Even more curiously, those land records disappeared within a year of being filed. When Carmen requested copies from the county archive, she was told they'd been accidentally lost in the flood of 1878, but the flood didn't reach the county courthouse. She checked. Asterisk. The implication was chilling. Someone had intentionally buried any record that might link the Wessons to inheritance. This wasn't about love or vengeance. It was about possession. In the legal sense, and possibly in another. Asterisk. Then came the photograph. Carmen found it in a donated box at a historical society in Maryland. No one knew who left it. It was labeled simply, Bell Hollow, 1860. It showed the Wesson sisters lined up in front of the orchard, all wearing black. Not mourning black, wedding black. The dresses were formal. The collars high. Each sister held something different: a pair of gloves, a handkerchief, a lock of hair, a small box. But what disturbed Carmen was the figure behind them, a pale blur, barely distinguishable, standing in the shadows beneath a crooked apple tree. Asterisk. It was a man. He was not smiling. And though the photo had aged poorly, one detail stood out crystal clear. His left hand was missing. Asterisk. Only one of the Wesson husbands had been described in local lore as losing fingers in a factory injury. That was Emery Tate, the man who married Lillian. The man who died 6 weeks later from a falling branch. Carmen submitted her findings. Her advisor praised the research but said it felt too fictional. She changed topics. But before she left Bell Hollow for good, she visited the orchard. Not out of belief, just habit. Asterisk. It was late afternoon. No wind. No birds. Just heat and the scent of wet wood. The house was barely standing. Only the parlor wall remained. But something had been left behind. A chair. Old, wooden, hand-carved. On its seat rested 5 objects: a wedding ring, a prayer book, a bottle of laudanum, a pipe, and a bundle of wildflowers. Beneath the chair, the ground had been scorched into a perfect circle. Carmen took a photo. The image came out blurry. The chair didn't appear. She deleted it and left. But the story wasn't done. 3 years later, in 2009, a fire broke out during a late summer drought. It started in the woods behind where the Wesson orchard once stood. By the time it reached the town line, 14 acres had burned, including the last 2 standing apple trees. When firefighters cleared the debris, they found something beneath the blackened roots. Not bodies, not graves, but 6 wooden chests. All identical. 5 were labeled Clara, Lillian, Margaret, Eleanor, Ruth. The 6th bore no name. Inside it were dozens of items: rings, cufflinks, pocket watches, ink pens, lockets, all engraved with initials that matched no known residents of Bell Hollow. A list was found at the bottom. It had 17 names next to each one, in the same thin handwriting. Paid. To this day, no one knows who the 6th chest belonged to. Some believe it was Constance's. Others say it was meant for Ruth, and she simply never finished filling it. But some, especially the older residents who remember the stories whispered by their grandparents, believe it was never meant for any of the sisters. They say it belonged to someone else, someone who taught the girls how to walk silently, how to keep their hands still at the dinner table, and how to smile just long enough to make someone sign a deed of trust before their tea turned cold. Someone who never needed to lift a finger, because her daughters already knew how to obey. Now, in Bell Hollow, the Wesson name is only spoken in warnings. Don't wear ivory down by the creek. Don't light a lamp in an empty hallway. Don't say "I do" with a Wesson watching. And if you ever hear a knock on your door, just once, after midnight, don't open it, because some say the sisters still walk the edges of the orchard, looking for what was taken from them, or for someone to take their place. After all, there were only 5 weddings, but 6 veils, a tea set, a tombstone, and a letter never sent. Eliza Holling poured tea for a man who had been dead 6 months. The clock on the mantel struck 4, as it did every day, and with the same quiet deliberation, she rose from her armchair, lifted the porcelain teapot by its narrow neck, and filled a single teacup, his teacup, without spilling a drop. She placed it on the saucer, just to the right of the empty chair across from her. And then she sat back down, waiting, watching. Jonathan Holling had not been declared dead, not officially. But his ship, the Darien, had never returned from Havana. No wreckage had washed up, no survivors came home. The other widows of Marblehead wept together in chapel. They brought casseroles to each other's porches. They read the sea reports until the pages blurred. Eliza did none of that. She bought a gravestone. It arrived at the end of January, 4 weeks after the last sightings of the Darien. Plain with clean serif lettering. Jonathan Holling lost too. The C 1854. She placed it in the family plot, even though no body had been recovered. Closure, she told the sexton. The man hated uncertainty. Then she ordered the tea set. 6 pieces, white porcelain, hand-painted violets. Imported from England. Too delicate for the harsh salt air. Too ornate for a woman living alone. When the postmaster's boy delivered it, she didn't thank him. She just nodded and placed the set inside her parlor cupboard like it had always belonged there. By March, Eliza's routine was local legend. The widow who poured tea for a ghost, never drank, never missed a day. Townsfolk began to wonder aloud quietly, and only behind doors, if she'd gone soft in the head. But those who had known Eliza before Jonathan's disappearance said that wasn't possible. She was always 3 steps ahead, said the grocer. She never raised her voice, said the stable hand. She memorized scripture like it owed her a debt, said the vicar's wife. It was April when the first letter came. A courier brought it from Boston, unmarked, no return address. Just her name, written in a quick, masculine script on the front. Eliza didn't open it immediately. She stared at it over supper, then again the next morning. On the third day, she broke the seal. The contents were brief. 8 words written. On thick cotton paper. Still waiting, not drowned. Not yours to bury. She burned the letter in her stove that night. She did not cry. 2 days later, she visited the town notary and amended her will. Then she went to the post office and left a sealed envelope with instructions. If anything should happen to me, she said to Mr. Wick, this is to be mailed immediately. To whom? He asked. She hesitated. My husband. The silence that followed was not the polite kind. Wick opened his mouth to remind her that Jonathan was lost at sea, but her gaze made the correction stick in his throat. He nodded, took the letter, and placed it in the metal drawer reserved for sensitive correspondence. That night, the drawer was found open. The envelope was gone. By early May, the teacup on the parlor table had changed position. It sat closer to the edge. A faint chip appeared near the rim. No one had touched it. Eliza was known to live alone, and the maid had quit the year before after claiming to hear humming from an empty room when the doctor made a house call for a sprained ankle. He saw the tea set and asked, casually, who else is joining us today? Eliza didn't answer. He did not return for the follow-up, on May 19th. Jonathan Howling was spotted, or someone fitting his description. Tall black coat, sailor's limp. Seen by the dockhand at the old pier, staring toward the Howling house. When asked who he was looking for, the man allegedly replied, I'm owed a conversation. Then he turned and vanished behind a warehouse. That same evening, a light was seen in Eliza's attic window for the first time in years. The next morning, Eliza visited the church. She sat alone in the last pew, not praying, just watching the altar. When the vicar approached her, she asked a single question. If one has grieved too soon, does God count that as faith or failure? The vicar didn't know how to respond. On May 21st, Marblehead woke to find the gravestone missing. Gone, not broken, not stolen, just missing. In its place was a hole in the earth, perfectly dug, coffin length, lined with violets that hadn't grown in that plot in years. Eliza didn't answer her door that morning, or that night, or the next. By May 25th, she was declared missing. No signs of struggle, no luggage taken. Her home was undisturbed, except for the parlor. There, the tea set remained, untouched but for one cup, which had been shattered. Deliberately. Each piece arranged into the shape of a letter. The official report listed Eliza Howling as missing, presumed deceased, but everyone in Marblehead knew better. Missing people leave signs. A door ajar, a muddy footprint, a note. Eliza left nothing except a shattered teacup and a perfectly dug grave where her husband's marker had once stood. The police called it an act of grief-driven mania. The town called it something else, a reckoning. The Howling house remained unclaimed. Eliza had no known relatives. Her will, amended shortly before her disappearance, left the property to no one. The front gate grew stiff with salt and rust. Weeds overtook the garden beds. But the inside of the house remained immaculate, dustless, untouched, almost staged. And then the second letter arrived. It came by post, stamped from Boston but bearing no return address, just like the first. Mr. Wick at the post office opened it, not knowing who to deliver it to. He recognized the handwriting at once, sharp, right-leaning, impatient. Inside was a single line. Did you think I wouldn't find the stone missing? It wasn't signed. It didn't need to be. This time, the letter was not destroyed. Wick kept it in his drawer, beneath a stack of old shipping manifests. He showed it to no one for 2 months, until the night the church bell rang once, unprovoked, at 2:17 a.m. It hadn't rung since Jonathan's memorial service. And then, 3 days later, the grave reappeared. Not the one from the family plot, but a fresh one, dug behind the Halling house, just beneath the lilac tree Eliza had once planted from a seed. No name, no marker, but the earth had clearly been disturbed. Fresh loam, clean edges, a grave not meant to be found. But not hidden either. By the time the sheriff arrived, a third letter had come. This one addressed directly to Sheriff Malcolm. Tate, I know you're watching. You'll find what you're looking for beneath the violet roots. But only if you understand what it means to mourn someone who refused to die. Sheriff Tate ordered the grave to be exhumed. They found a coffin inside. There was no body. Only Eliza's mourning dress, perfectly folded. Her wedding ring sewn into the collar. And resting atop the fabric unbroken, flawless, was the missing teacup, the one she had shattered before she vanished. The sheriff, to his credit, did not call it a hoax. He wrote in the incident report, unusual circumstances. No clear explanation. Recommend no further disturbance. That recommendation was taken seriously. The grave was filled back in. No marker placed. The town, as it often did with its unsolvable truths, moved on in practiced silence, but the letters did not stop. Over the next 2 years, 6 more arrived, each one brief, each written in the same hand, all postmarked from different towns along the coast: Gloucester, New Bedford, even as far north as Rockland, Maine. They contained lines like, "She never liked sugar. You should have remembered that. The dead keep better company than liars. If she comes back, I won't leave." Again, no one knew who she was anymore. Some said Eliza had never been real, that the Halling house had been empty for decades, and the story invented from fragments of grief and imagination. But the letters were real. They were dated, postmarked, and all bore the same wax seal, a plain circle, pressed by hand. One woman, Margaret Lowell, whose grandmother had lived across from Eliza, claimed to have seen her in 1912. She was wearing a gray cloak. Margaret said, walking down the wharf at sunset. She looked straight at me and didn't blink. I swear she hadn't aged a day. No one believed her. But no one quite dismissed it either. In 1917, just as the town was turning its attention to the war in Europe, the Halling house caught fire. Witnesses reported no lightning, no gas, no reason for the blaze. But it burned hot and fast, consuming the entire structure in less than 20 minutes. By the time the fire brigade arrived, the house was ash, but the parlor remained, blackened, scorched but intact. And sitting on the edge of the brick hearth, untouched by flame, was the full tea set. All 6 pieces. No chips, no cracks. Still warm. The fire spurred renewed investigation. A team of state archivists came to Marblehead in 1918 to examine the Halling case. They requested all existing records, marriage licenses, death notices, property deeds, but something had changed. Jonathan Halling's name was missing. No marriage certificate. No shipping manifests from the Darien. No entry in the town census. Only Eliza's records remained. A birth. A deed to a house. A notarized will, but no marriage, no widow, no one to mourn. The last letter came in 1920. It was found tucked inside a hymnal on the 5th pew of the town church. No envelope. Just a sheet of thick paper, folded once. The ink was dry. The handwriting, now slow, shaky. It read, "She waited for me to drown so she could begin again. But I waited too. She never poured a cup for herself. Now she have no one to serve but the dust." The church sealed the hymnal shut. It remains that way to this day. The Halling house was never rebuilt. The property was fenced off then. Forgotten. By the 1950s, most locals didn't know who Eliza was. By the 1970s, the story became one told at slumber parties and scout retreats. The woman who married a man she never forgave, the tea set that never cooled, the grave that was always waiting to be filled, and a name Jonathan Holling that no one could prove ever belonged to anyone at all. Asterisk by 1932. What remained of the Holling estate was little more than soil and stories. The fence surrounding the property had fallen into its own shadow. Children dared each other to crawl under it at dusk, but most turned back. Not because of what they saw, but because of what they didn't. The air around the land felt still in a way that air shouldn't feel, like a held breath that never let go. Asterisk the tea set had vanished again. After the fire, it had been taken in for preservation by the Marblehead Historical Committee until it wasn't. When a local historian went to catalog it for a regional ghost lore exhibit in 1931, the display case was empty. The key was still in the curator's desk. The alarm had never gone off. But all 6 pieces were gone, and the note beneath the plaque was scrawled in unfamiliar handwriting. She stopped pouring. The museum replaced the plaque with a watercolor of the harbor and never spoke of the incident again. Asterisk decades passed. The town grew older, quieter. The story of Eliza Holling became a local footnote, reduced to a sentence in a historical walking tour. The widow who vanished. The house was paved over in the 1950s to make room for a cul-de-sac that never quite stayed level. Residents of the new houses complained of creaking floorboards and flickering lights, but no one remembered the woman in the veil, or the man who may never have existed. Asterisk until 1976, when a renovation crew began digging a trench for a drainage pipe and struck wood. Asterisk it wasn't a coffin. Not exactly. It was a box, polished, hinged, carefully buried, just beneath the former footprint of the Holling parlor. Inside were 6 porcelain shards, precisely arranged, and a letter, wrapped in oilcloth, dated 1854. The letter bore no signature, but the writing was unmistakable. Tight, straight lines, the kind of script people used when they wanted the words to endure. It read, "You may call me a widow, but I never lost a husband. I lost the illusion of one. He left before the sea ever took him. All I did was bury the silence he left behind. A grave is just a promise. I made mine before I was ready. But I made it. He came back once. I poured him tea. He asked me if I still wore the ring. I told him no. I showed him the shovel instead. No body was found with the letter. No sign of struggle. Just the note, the broken cup, and beneath them a violet, perfectly dried. Asterisk. The letter was archived at the Massachusetts Historical Society, but never publicly displayed. Its existence is known only through a footnote in a 1983 journal entry by a retired archivist who referred to it simply as the Hollow Wife document. He ended the entry with one sentence: "I no longer believe she disappeared. I believe she chose a different kind of presence." A different kind of presence. It's the phrase that stuck, because by then, the phenomenon had expanded. Reports began coming in from nearby towns. A tea set would be found left in an attic where none had been stored. Letters in wax-sealed envelopes would arrive addressed to names no one recognized. In 1992, a librarian in Ipswich discovered a book returned to the wrong shelf. Inside was a folded slip of paper with 5 words, "He drank." She waited forever. The book? Widowhood and Social Graces in the Colonial Northeast. In 2007, a Marblehead genealogist attempted to trace Eliza Holling's ancestry. She hit dead ends on both sides. No birth record, no parents. The only record, an 1851 property deed for the Holling house, had Eliza listed as Miss Eliza Cartwright. No mention of a marriage. No mention of Jonathan. But deeper in the archive, hidden behind a water-damaged box of shipping logs, was one peculiar entry, a marriage license request dated August 5, 1853. Groom, Jonathan H. Bride. Eliza C. filed, but never signed. The license was marked void. Groom did not appear. So what had Eliza buried? Not a husband. Not a body. A question. One that never got answered. One she chose to silence herself. Some say she killed him when he returned. Some say he never returned at all, that her mind, locked in a loop of grief and betrayal, summoned a ghost only she could see. Others believe the letter was her confession, not of murder, but of escape from the name, the house, the weight of being his instead of hers. But if she escaped, where did she go? In 2013, a journalist from Salem published an article titled "The Widow of Violet Street." It detailed a woman who lived alone in a small coastal cottage, never spoke to neighbors, and was seen every afternoon at precisely 4 o'clock. Pouring tea for no one across the table. She wore a plain ring of sea-polished iron. She called herself Miss Cartwright. She died in her sleep at the age of 101. Her obituary listed no next of kin. Her will included only one request: place the teacup beside me. And so they did. The cup was found wrapped in cloth, painted with faint violets, a perfect match for her. The set once housed in Marblehead, somewhere in a basement archive in Boston. The letters remain, uncatalogued, unclaimed, but if you ever come across one sealed in black wax, bearing no return address, think carefully before you open it. Because the story of Eliza Halling wasn't about a woman who lost her husband. It was about a woman who refused to be found by him again. The bride, beneath the floorboards, the inn on Halberd Street was never meant to be a place of permanence. Built in 1831, it was a way station for tradesmen and ferry captains, 12 rooms, one shared hearth, and a proprietor who kept to herself. There were no lanterns in the hallway after dark, no locks on the windows, and no questions asked of guests who arrived with dirt on their boots and silence in their mouths. But for 7 weeks in the spring of 1847, the inn hosted a woman named Nora Pell. She arrived without luggage and paid for a corner room in silver coin. Her dress was travel-stained but recently pressed. She had one book, no gloves, and a veil tucked inside her coat pocket, stiff with dried lace. She told the innkeeper, Mrs. Stagley, that she was waiting for her fiancé to return from across the river. He's gone to bring the last paper, she said. Then we'll be married. Every evening, Nora sat by the fireplace and stared at the same plank in the floor. She never asked for supper. She never left the premises. And on Sundays, she could be heard whispering vows in a voice so soft it sounded like wind threading through the rafters. No one came for her. By the 3rd week, the guests began to ask questions. Not directly to Nora, but to Mrs. Stagley. Who was she? Where was the groom? Was that really a wedding veil in her satchel, or something else entirely? She's paid in full, Mrs. Stagley would reply, and she doesn't snore. But the tension grew. On the 25th night of Nora's stay, another guest, a cobbler named Edwin Hall, reported hearing footsteps in the hallway, even though no one else had left their room. He said it sounded like pacing, heavy boots, heel first. He opened his door to find the hallway empty and the air inexplicably cold. Nora's room was across the hall. The door was open. She was gone, but the veil remained spread neatly across the bed. Each corner weighted with a silver coin. Mrs. Stagley alerted the sheriff. A search was organized. The ferrymaster confirmed no woman had crossed the river that day. The shopkeepers had seen no one. The cobbler swore he hadn't imagined the footsteps. Nora Pell had vanished. 2 days later, the carpenter found her. Or rather, he found what she had left behind. He was repairing a warped floorboard in the parlor, just in front of the hearth, when the plank lifted with a reluctant groan. Beneath it was a shallow space lined with stone and packed earth. At first, he thought it might be a root cellar or an old ash pit. But then he saw the imprint an indentation in the dirt, no wider than a woman's shoulders, no longer than a body. At rest, asterisk at the center of the shape was a handkerchief, folded and embroidered with the letter P. It was blood-stained. Asterisk, the sheriff ordered the parlor sealed. The guests were relocated. Mrs. Stagley was interviewed and released. No charges were filed, no body had been found, and the handkerchief, while suspicious, wasn't considered sufficient evidence of foul play. But rumors began to grow, as they always did. Asterisk that Nora had never waited for her fiancé, she'd fled him. That the silver she paid with was stolen. That she hadn't disappeared at all, but had slipped between the cracks of the floorboards, waiting for someone to finish the vows she'd begun. Asterisk then, 6 weeks after her disappearance, a letter arrived at the inn. Asterisk it was addressed to Mrs. Nora Pell, Halberd Street Inn, room 3. The handwriting was thick and uneven, like someone unused to pens. Inside was a single line, "Meet me at the altar by the stone." There was no return address, no signature. And the letter smelled faintly of smoke and lavender. Asterisk, the parlor remained closed, but not forgotten. After the discovery beneath the floor, guests at the Halberd Street Inn refused to stay in rooms near the stairwell. The innkeeper, Mrs. Stagley, covered the door with an old bedsheet and tacked a note to it, "Maintenance ongoing, do not disturb." She never said what was being maintained, but the building knew. The hearth began to spit ash even when cold. The floorboards around the parlor door warped inwards, as if the room were drawing in breath. Guests reported dreams of footsteps they didn't take. One woman, a widow from Providence, awoke to find her wedding ring twisted backward on her finger. She hadn't worn it since her husband drowned, years before, and the letters kept arriving, one each week, always addressed to Nora Pell, always in that heavy, halting script. The veil fits now. The vows are buried, but not broken. There is a stone beneath the floor. Come. Mrs. Stagley, unable to return them, placed the letters in a wooden cigar box. She locked it. By the time the 6th one arrived, the key no longer turned. It was a traveling reverend who finally opened the parlor again. He had come through Marblehead once before, and remembered the inn as quiet and clean. When offered a room above the parlor, he hesitated, but accepted. That night he claimed to hear whispering from the floor below, not voices, just a rhythm, as though someone were reciting vows, but the words wouldn't form. He knelt beside the wall, placed his palm against the wood, and felt a pulse. Asterisk, he asked Mrs. Stagley the next morning for a crowbar. She refused. So he borrowed one from the farrier 2 doors down. The parlor opened easily. Dust coated everything. The fireplace was cold. But in the very center of the room, something new had appeared. A stone. Round, smooth, and unmarked. It hadn't been there before. Asterisk. The Reverend didn't panic. He knelt and prayed beside it. He placed his hand on the stone. He later told townsfolk that it felt warmer than it should, like it had been held, not buried. When he rose, something had changed in his face. The confidence had drained. He left the inn that afternoon and never returned to the ministry. Asterisk, he left behind one item, a slip of parchment placed under the cigar box. She is still waiting. But it isn't him she's waiting for. 2 weeks later, a man checked into the inn. Name, Mr. Elias Roque. Age, unknown. Paid in coin, silver worn and old. He requested room 3 without being offered. He stayed one night. He never came back. Asterisk, in the morning, the door was locked from the inside. When Mrs. Stagley opened it with the spare key, the bed was untouched, the window sealed, and a single item lay on the knitstand, a bridal glove, gray, fingerless, worn through at the palm. Asterisk, that afternoon, the hearth in the parlor lit itself. By fall, the inn had emptied. No one would stay. Mrs. Stagley closed the doors and shuttered the windows, but she never sold the building. She lived upstairs alone, long past her prime, refusing to discuss what had happened or what still was happening beneath. Her floor, in 1891, she died of natural causes. Her will named no heirs. But her journal, found beneath her mattress, contained one final entry. They said he went to get the papers, but he came back with rope. She never said I do, and that's why the house won't forget. The inn was boarded up. The parlor sealed. But the next year, a builder renovating the staircase found something between the walls. A marriage certificate, unfinished, bride, Nora Pell, groom, date, never written. The certificate had no groom's name, and yet it was signed. Not by Nora Pell, and not by the clerk who should have witnessed it. The signature was crude, the pen pressure heavy enough to cut through the paper in places. Just one word scrawled across the bottom in uneven slashing strokes. Mine. The builder dropped it and left the site before dusk. He never came back to finish the staircase. The town debated what to do with the inn. Some argued for demolition, others for conversion into a memorial. But the decision was made by silence. Every contractor hired to begin the teardown reported the same problem. Tools went missing. Nails rusted in their boxes. A hammer dropped through the second-story floor and was never recovered. They found the hammer 2 weeks later, beneath the parlor stone, embedded in the soil like it had always been there. The building was left to rot, the wood blackened. Ivy smothered the shutters, yet the parlor floor never buckled, never gave in. Through harsh winters and summers thick with salt air, it stood, level and quiet, as if guarding something not quite buried. In 1904, the first written account of the haunting was published anonymously in a Boston spiritualist pamphlet. Titled The Bride in the Boardwork, it told of a woman who waited too long to say no, and a man who took her silence as consent. The article ended with a chilling passage. She said her vows alone, but the floor heard, and the floor remembers. That same year, 3 travelers attempted to spend the night inside the abandoned inn. They were part of a curiosity club, young men looking for proof of the strange and spectral. They brought journals, whiskey, and a copper bell meant to summon spirits. They rang it at midnight. Only one man came back. He refused to speak for the rest of his life. He would sit on his porch in Trenton, Missouri, staring at nothing. Once, a neighbor heard him whisper, "She waited under me the whole time." He died in 1912. His personal effects included a bundle of old lace and a wedding band split in two. In 1928, the town made one final attempt to reclaim the land. The inn was razed. This time, the parlor was dismantled first. It took 3 days. When the last plank was pulled up, the workers uncovered what they described as a shaped cavity, rectangular and hollow. At its center, perfectly preserved, was a flat stone, smooth and dark, with no writing. They lifted it. Below was a staircase, 7 steps. Stone, dry, older than the house itself. At the bottom, a single chair. On it, folded with eerie care, was a gray bridal gown. No dust, no decay. As though it had been placed there hours earlier. The foreman sealed the site, told his men to leave it. The town paved over the foundation. No building was ever placed there again. And still on some late evenings when fog creeps through the side streets and windows rattle without wind, residents of Halberd Street say they hear the tap-tap of footsteps through their floorboards. Not walking, not pacing. Waiting. A rhythm that never reaches the door. In 1953, a child playing hopscotch on the corner lot where the inn once stood tripped over something in the dirt. It was a porcelain button. Hand-painted violets. 6 more were found over the next decade, always in spring, always after rain. The last recorded mention of Nora Pell came in 1981 from a 97-year-old woman in hospice care who had grown up 2 streets away from Halberd. She was interviewed by a college student writing a thesis on Massachusetts folklore. When asked if she remembered the story of the bride beneath the floorboards, the woman nodded slowly and said, "She didn't wait for the vows. She waited for someone to say she didn't have to. Then she fell asleep. She died that night peacefully." But under her pillow, nurses found an old, brittle invitation. "You are cordially invited to the wedding of Nora Pell. Location, to be determined. Time, when she says yes. They say ghosts remain because something unfinished holds them here. But Nora's story wasn't unfinished. It was overwritten. Her I do never came. And because no one listened for the silence between the words, she was buried beneath the weight of everyone else's expectations. The stone beneath the floor didn't mark a grave. It marked a refusal, a quiet, final one, asterisk.